We're looking at the boom in biotech IPOs. This is Market Checkup. Hi, I'm Allison with the Motley Fool, and I am joined today by David Williamson. He's a healthcare analyst here at the Fool, and today we are looking at the boom in biotech IPOs. So just to give some context to it, last year there were 11 IPOs. So far this year, triple that almost. We're at 29, and the year's not even over yet.
I know, it's only August. It feels like every CEO of a privately held biotech is just kicking in investment banking doors saying, let's go public.
Yeah, and it looks like they've actually been pretty successful with it. So what are some of the winners that have gone public recently?
Well, I'm glad you asked for winners because it would be really hard to find losers. We've just seen tremendous gains all across the board, which has really inspired a lot of the enthusiasm. Oncomed, Stemline have doubled. Another company like Bluebird Bio, it doubled originally. It has pared back some of those gains, but I think it's a good sort of example of what you're looking at when you look at a biotech IPO. Investors are excited because some of the target areas they're going after, the orphan drugs, which tend to be very profitable. They have a cancer drug that they're working on with Celgene, which gives it an air of legitimacy, and it's potentially a next generation cancer treatment. So there's a lot of excitement there, but take a look at how far their drugs are in development. They're all still preclinical or early phase 1 assets, so there's a long way to go in the development process.
Right, so if these biotech IPOs have been doing so well, then it's a good idea for me to drop what I'm doing and invest in them, right? Like that's an easy way to look at this and think.
I would say hold your horses a little bit because as glamorous as the IPO process is and you see all this excitement, unless you're getting some of those original shares, the gains aren't nearly as dramatic post-pop. So that is one thing to consider. Also, if you're buying and holding these companies, you're not necessarily going to be well served in the long run. Drug development is long and expensive, and these companies will burn cash, and there's real quiet periods when they're just developing the drugs. There's nothing really to announce. You take a look at Merrimack, which was one of those earlier IPOs, and yes, shares popped early on, but have basically since traded down the rest of the way, just a slow grind into losing money, and I don't think investors want to see their portfolios grind slowly down.
Right, so if someone did, really wanted to invest in a biotech IPO that's happened recently, or maybe one that's coming on the radar here, are there any that you recommend or that you're keeping an eye on at least?
I would actually go the other way. I would say instead of looking at an IPO, if you're looking for more of a biotech binary event, lottery ticket type stock, why don't you do what a lot of drug companies do, which is wait for these assets to be developed a little more. So look at something with phase 2, maybe late stage phase 3 assets that still have several big binary events like FDA approval ahead of them. A company I like is Sarepta. They have a Duchenne muscular dystrophy drug. It's through phase 2. They were talking to the FDA about potentially accelerated approval, but there's just been tremendous support about that. Yes, the stock has gone up. Are you getting in on the ground floor? No, but if this drug works, there's a lot of upside still left for a company like Sarepta.
All right, so maybe don't get wrapped up in the fervor of an IPO, but take a step back and really think long term about some of these companies.
Which is how we profess to invest here at
That's
the Fool.
how we like it here at the Fool. So all right, moving on. Beyond IPOs, there's been a lot of M&A activity going on right now. In fact, last year, Pharma had a 9% increase in M&A to $27 billion in mergers and acquisitions.
Yep.
So you actually see two drivers behind this activity, and the first is Obamacare.
Yeah, and Obamacare is not so much for the pharmas, but healthcare in general, because we really have seen sort of a bifurcation of this merger and acquisition activity. Obamacare, the regulations coming out of DC for the Affordable Care Act, have really had sweeping effects on both the managed care, which is the insurance companies, and hospital stocks. Now, insurance companies generally sort of shun the Medicaid business. It's not as profitable. The margins are lower, but because of the Medicaid expansion that's happening, your enrollment's going to get much higher, so that does help to offset those lower margins. We saw WellPoint buy Amerigroup for about $4.5 billion. Another example would be hospitals, where there's actually been really just a frenzy of mergers lately. We saw Tenet by Vanguard. We saw Community Health by Health Management, which was the hospital that was highlighted by 60 Minutes for some questionable practices. So they are getting a little baggage with that, but potentially a nice little turnaround, and it helps their assets in Florida as well. And what's happening here with hospitals is twofold. They should have less bad debt expense. Everyone's insured, so you don't have to deal with people not being insured and then not paying you. And then there's also the benefit of scale, where they can do better to negotiate and lower their costs that way.
Right, so then the second driver that you're seeing behind some of these mergers is not really big mega mergers that we're talking about here. They're more kind of smaller bolt-on acquisitions. What are we looking at here?
Well, the pharma companies, and part of the reason that we've seen that growth in M&A activity is they're dealing with the patent cliff. These patent expirations are taking billions of revenue away from them. And so we saw a surge of sort of mega mergers, Pfizer and Wyeth is an example. Now the pharma companies are talking about bolt-on acquisitions, which are smaller deals. They can just bring them into their existing business. They don't require as much financing. And I think a good example of this would be AstraZeneca. If I can talk about one of those IPOs, Omthera actually IPO'd this year. AstraZeneca snapped them up. That's rare. That's the exception. That's not the rule. So, bringing it back to biotech IPOs, do not invest looking for an immediate buyout. But, it was a drug. They have an omega-3 drug. It's supposed to help with. They're going to combine it with their statin Crestor to sort of create, hopefully, a next-generation combo cholesterol fighter. So they're bringing that into their existing business to bolster an existing product. And a larger bolt-on acquisition would be something like Onyx Pharmaceuticals, which is in the news recently. Amgen made a bid there for $130 a share. Onyx has 2 approved drugs. They're cancer drugs. Kyprolis is one of them. They also have palbociclib with Pfizer. Pfizer was apparently looking at it as well, but they dropped out, said it was getting too pricey. AstraZeneca is still doing due diligence, so that could be something they could look at picking up. And truthfully, of all the pharmas, AstraZeneca needs it the most. Their pipeline is the saddest looking. It's a big frowny face, and they're going to be in a lot of trouble if they don't bolster that.
So maybe the smartest M&A was AstraZeneca, would you say? Or
they're the ones who need to do it the most. I think some of the other pharmas can be a little more patient, but Onyx is a good acquisition. They have 2 approved drugs that have a lot of potential, and then palbociclib in their pipeline also could be a mega blockbuster as well.
So do you see this trend continuing in high levels of M&A, or?
I have some concerns. I think that the pharmas would certainly love to add more stuff to their pipeline, more drugs, more potential. That's how they grow their businesses. But because of all the enthusiasm in biotech, valuations have gotten a little rich, and so I wonder if we're going to stop seeing as much growth in M&A and some more of these drug development deals where a pharma will give a biotech, a couple $100 million, milestones for some more money, if it passes phase 2, phase 3, regulatory stuff, and then royalties upon sale. I think that's probably going to be a more common practice if biotech continues to outperform the market as much as it has.
All right, great. That's a really great rundown there. So let's move on here a little bit, and because the big question is, can biotech really keep this winning streak alive? Mm-hmm. So healthcare stocks have been on a tear lately. Not even just lately, but if you look at the NASDAQ Biotech Index, it's up about 40% year to date. So they're destroying the market. I mean, the Dow is up 15% at the same time. So it's not just a matter of a rising tide lifting the healthcare boat. It really has had a good run here for a few years. So
it's not just this year. It's the past 3 years plus. It's really been outperforming.
So do you think the party is going to end anytime soon for healthcare?
Well, it is primarily a defensive industry. And yes, I recognize the U.S. economy isn't great. It's been crawling towards something that resembles a recovery, and biotech isn't as correlated. So, that does bring it some attention as investors are looking for avenues of growth. But rarely have we seen biotech go on a huge run like this. And if I can use a baseball analogy, I'm concerned that we're moving into the later innings of a bull market. That said, biotech does tend to outperform in the back half of the year. And so it should be fine for the rest of 2013. Going into 2014, I'll reevaluate. There are some definite drivers as well. There's a lot of R&D has been done over the years, and that's finally bearing fruit. So we've seen a lot of blockbuster drugs that are just getting to market or about to be on market. So earnings per share and projected earnings per share are starting to rise as well. So that's sort of keeping pace with the valuation. I don't want to say this time it's different, because whenever someone says that, bad things generally follow. But we are going through a bit of a revolution in biotech, whether it's sustainable long term. Obviously, 40% a year that you can't sustain that long term. But it is an ongoing revolution. We've seen the FDA is become a little more kinder and friendlier in the regulatory process as well. So it's all helping boost biotech forward.
So what are you keeping an eye on as far as signs that'll tell you that the party is coming to an end, that the streak is going to at least maybe slow down, maybe not totally shut down, but...
I think I mentioned R&D bearing fruit. The question is, what if some of that fruit is rotten, right? What if some of these big drugs that are in late-stage trials don't pan out? Or what if some of these big launches don't measure up to expectations? Biogen's oral multiple sclerosis drug, Tecfidera, was really one of the most hyped drugs in a long time. And so far its launch looks like it's going well, but there are analysts projecting 7, 8, 9 billion in peak sales. And obviously it takes a little while to ramp up to that. But if you're an investor and you're seeing that number and all of a sudden it grows more slowly, or say there's a safety issue along the way and something like Gilead sofosbuvir, which is a hepatitis C drug. Every other drug in its class had some sort of safety issue during drug development. What if it gets to market, it gets approved, it gets to market, it starts to sell well, and all of a sudden there's an unforeseen safety issue? So we have a lot of these drugs, Kalydeco for Vertex, and ibrutinib for Pharmacyclics. These are $3, $4, $5 billion peak sale drugs. And really, these are the drugs those companies are relying on. Those companies, Vertex is a little more complicated, but they're essentially one-trick ponies. This is what they're going to be resting their hat on. Shareholders could really be in for some pain if these drugs don't pan out.
Yeah, so then are there any safe harbors? I mean, are there any companies that you're keeping an eye on that you think are going to be safer than others?
Well, I think at the end of the day, diversification helps you. So that's why I'm looking at the biggest biotechs. I think investors in biotech investing should think big. The 4 biggest biotechs, Amgen, Biogen, Celgene, and Gilead, are all strong companies. They're all diverse. They don't just hang their hat on one product. And they're really growing earnings per share strongly. You take a look at Celgene. They're focused in oncology. They have a number of approved lymphoma and leukemia products. Revlimid is a huge blockbuster. It should continue to grow. They also have a psoriatic arthritis drug, a rheumatoid arthritis drug as well that's in drug development. They're talking about doubling earnings per share by 2017, so that's not insignificant. And if the bottom does fall out in this biotech bull market, at a certain point those earnings will protect you on the downside because the shares will be dirt cheap on an earnings basis. I also like Gilead. I mentioned sofosbuvir, but I do believe that drug should be fine. Gilead still dominates the HIV space, and they keep improving their products there. They just launched Stribild, which is a best-in-class HIV regimen, and now they have potentially a paradigm-shifting drug for hepatitis C. So I think there's a lot of excitement there, and I think of the 4, those 2 are probably the cheapest based on where they can grow into in the next coming years.
So then you like the big 4, but obviously usually big guys aren't as sexy to invest in as the small guys who are popping and dropping all the time. So are there any stocks that you see right now that maybe have a lot of momentum or hype around them that you think investors should probably think twice about looking into, or?
That's an interesting question. I worry about, let's say Mankind, for instance, which has an inhaled insulin drug candidate, Afrezza. They just announced phase 3 trials that went well, and they're going up for FDA approval. The drug was rejected once, but not for the drug itself. It was rejected because of the inhaler, so they had to rerun this trial with a new inhaler. But the stock's up, over 300% year to date. It's up again on this news, but the question for a company like this, not only, so there's a lot of hype, there's been a huge run-up, but I have a concern, and we've seen this over and over again, the obesity drug makers as well. Once you get a drug to market, it's not just enough to get it approved, you have to be able to sell it. And I have concerns with both inhalable insulin. Pfizer had one with a much clunkier device, but is there really a market? Pfizer ended up essentially pulling their drug because there wasn't enough sales to justify doing it. So I think Mankind may not find the market as friendly as they expect it to be. And I think the obesity drug makers, Arena and Vivus, I think a lot of investors were expecting, the first obesity drugs in a decade plus, like this will do fantastic, but sales have been disappointing. So I think when you're looking at a really hyped stock or drug, you need to step back and ask yourself, is this really going to get fast, widespread market adoption? In a lot of cases, it's a slow ramp, and especially for smaller companies that don't have huge sales forces like your less sexy big biotechs and big pharmas.
All right. Well, I think that covers it for today. Unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
Oh, I think I'm good, Allison.
All right. Well, that was a lot for people to take in. So, I want to thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Market Checkup.